Why was there a sudden, dramatic shift in how the United States is handling one of the most dangerous geopolitical flashpoints on the planet? Just as global markets braced for a massive military escalation in the Middle East, the White House executed a surprising pivot. Instead of launching heavy strikes or issuing fiery ultimatums, Washington has intentionally backed off, choosing to slow down the pace of confrontation. They are allowing a far quieter, but potentially far more devastating force to take over: overwhelming economic exhaustion. To understand why this strategy is unfolding right now, we have to look directly at the words of the U.S. leadership. In an exclusive interview, former President Donald Trump detailed the rationale behind this calculated retreat from the brink. His message was surprisingly blunt. The United States is intentionally low-keying its approach to Iran and only semi-negotiating with Tehran. Instead of relying on brute military force to compel a deal, Washington is choosing to sit back and watch as the Islamic Republic's economy collapses under the weight of hyperinflation, isolation, and domestic instability. In Trump's own assessment, the entire conflict has turned into a high-stakes game of geopolitical chess, where time and financial reality are doing the heavy lifting. At the core of this decision is a simple economic calculation. Over the past several months, strict naval blockades and severe international sanctions have starved the Iranian government of critical revenue. According to intelligence reports and official U.S. assessments, Tehran's financial reserves have dwindled to critically low levels. The economic strain has become so acute that the regime is reportedly struggling to perform the most basic functions of state power, including paying regular salaries to its own military forces and security personnel. By avoiding a major air campaign or ground operation, the U.S. avoids a costly military engagement while forcing the leadership in Tehran to confront an internal economic crisis that grows worse with every passing week. This strategy of strategic patience is also deeply tied to the global energy market and one specific maritime choke point: the Strait of Hormuz. Located between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, this narrow stretch of water is arguably the most vital oil artery in the world. Historically, roughly 1/5 of the world's petroleum supply passes through this single waterway. When conflict flared dramatically earlier in the year, Iran took aggressive steps to restrict shipping through the strait, sending shockwaves through global energy markets and driving crude oil prices above $100 a barrel. At the time, spiked energy costs threatened to spark global inflation and inflict immediate damage on American consumers. However, the economic picture has shifted significantly. Through adjusted supply routes and changing market conditions, crude oil prices have fallen back down towards $75 a barrel. This reduction in energy costs has relieved domestic pressure on Washington, granting U.S. policymakers the luxury of time. Without the immediate threat of an energy spike dragging down the Western economy, the White House feels no urgency to rush into an imperfect deal or launch a risky military offensive just to clear the waterway. Meanwhile, the diplomatic situation around the Strait of Hormuz remains locked in a high-tension stalemate. Oman and other regional intermediaries had spent weeks trying to broker a compromise that would guarantee safe passage for commercial vessels in exchange for targeted sanction relief. Last week, diplomats were on the verge of announcing a breakthrough. However, those hopes were dashed when Tehran unexpectedly introduced a series of aggressive new demands. They insisted on unprecedented Iranian authority over maritime traffic in the strait and demanded structural changes to U.S. military presence in the region. Under normal circumstances, a sudden collapse in diplomatic talks would trigger an immediate military response or a wave of public threats from Washington. Yet this time, the reaction from the U.S. was remarkably understated. Rather than threatening massive retaliation, American officials signaled that they were content to leave the current sanctions and naval blockades in place, allowing Iran to carry the burden of its own economic isolation. Behind the scenes in Tehran, this economic vice is fueling a fierce internal power struggle. The Iranian political establishment has effectively fractured into two competing camps, each advocating a completely different path forward. On one side stands the pragmatist government led by President Masoud Pezeshkian. Pezeshkian's administration argues that Iran cannot survive prolonged isolation. They believe a pragmatic compromise on the Strait of Hormuz is essential to lift blockades, stabilize the national currency, and prevent widespread civil unrest. On the opposing side are the hardline commanders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, led by influential figures such as General Ahmad Vahidi. The IRGC views any concession to Washington or its allies as an unacceptable surrender that would undermine national sovereignty. The hardliners favor a posture of maximum resistance, believing that maintaining control over global shipping lanes gives Iran leverage. Adding a deep layer of uncertainty to this internal division is the complete public absence of Iran's supreme decision-maker, Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei. Mojtaba assumed the position following the death of his father, Ali Khamenei, during the opening strikes of the conflict. However, Mojtaba was reportedly injured during those initial attacks and has not been seen in public since taking power. He has released no video messages or audio recordings, relying instead on written statements published through state media. This lack of visibility has sparked intense speculation about his health, his level of physical control, and his ability to govern. While Iranian state media insists that President Pezeshkian has held detailed, high-level meetings with the supreme leader, Pezeshkian himself recently admitted publicly that direct communication with Khamenei remains extremely difficult. Senior commanders in the Revolutionary Guard have repeatedly promised that photographs and video footage of Mojtaba Khamenei meeting with officials will be released to the public in the near future, but no timeline has been provided. By adopting a low-key approach, the United States is actively exploiting this power vacuum and political paralysis. An open military attack by foreign forces often acts as a unifying event, forcing rival domestic factions to put aside their differences and rally around the flag. By deliberately stepping back from direct military action, Washington deprives Tehran of an external enemy to blame for its immediate troubles. Instead, the Iranian regime is left alone to face an angry population, a collapsing currency, unpaid soldiers, and a bitter internal struggle over who truly controls the country's future. Whether this strategy of economic attrition will ultimately succeed remains one of the defining questions of modern geopolitics. Will crippling financial pressure and internal fractures force the Iranian government to soften its demands and negotiate a peaceful resolution for the Strait of Hormuz? Or will the hardline military establishment double down, escalating regional security risks even further as economic desperation sets in? For now, the strategy from Washington is clear. Hold the line, maintain the economic pressure, keep the military options low-key, and let the ticking clock do the work.